And so we come to the end of another long-running series on the Famicom. What's that? You don't remember the other Namcot Mahjong games? Well, that's because they didn't use this title. Family Mahjong 1 and 2 were developed by Nichibutsu. Nichibutsu made a lot of arcade Mahjong machines, so they were a perfect choice to develop those games, except they also had their own Famicom development division, and so they made their own Nichibutsu Mahjong III. Namco may have lost their developer, but they weren't going to let a popular series die, and so they brought the development in-house and changed the title to Namcot Mahjong. Mahjong is a tile-based game that's very similar to Rummy. You basically have to collect sets of 3 or runs of 3. And you can pick up what your opponent discards when it makes one of those sets. The version of Mahjong most commonly played in Japan, and represented 18 times on the Famicom, is Riichi Mahjong, a variant that uses a complicated scoring system and requires that players build hands with particular characteristics before they're allowed to go out. At this point, we're kind of in peak Famicom Mahjong territory, and every game has to bring something new to the table. And to that end, Namcot Mahjong III gives you 2 modes, and just 2 modes. You can just play regular 2-player Mahjong. That's a simpler version than what's usually played, but it's often used in video games. The other game mode is a board game where you're trying to conquer Japan. You move a certain number of spaces and then an event occurs. You do have stats that affect a multiplier for how much damage you do to your opponent when you win a hand, and these are modified by basic guessing games that you'll land on. Otherwise, you play repeated hands against the same opponent until you defeat them. That is, win enough hands with enough effects that you bring their point total down to 0. And when you encounter an opponent, those matches continue until one of you wins a hand. If neither of you can go out, then you just repeat until one of you can. Lose in one of these rounds and you go back a few squares. Though, as a penalty, that's not really significant. The points that you have to knock off your opponents keep increasing as you progress through Japan, and the final boss has 500,000 points. A really good hand in Mahjong might net you 10,000. So you'll really have to build up those modifiers. Just like almost all of these 8-bit Mahjong games, Namcot Mahjong III doesn't seem to have had a lasting impact. Nobody goes back and plays these old Mahjong games. And in this case in particular, there's even less reason to than usual. The board game mode is pretty dinky compared to all of the modes we've seen from other Mahjong games lately. This isn't a bad rendition of Mahjong, but it is a bit uninspired compared to what we've been seeing from other companies. And if I was going to have to play one of these 8-bit Mahjong games, this one would be pretty far down my list.